Good morning, everyone. I'm excited to have you on today's webinar. And we're just going to wait a couple minutes for everyone to join, but would love to have you start and chat and just introduce yourself and where you're joining us from. So just go into the chat and share sort of who you are and where you're calling in from. And I see we're starting off with someone from France, which is where my daughter is. So that's exciting. Way to kick us off. Some Seattle, I love it. New York, Cincinnati, amazing. Popping up from all over the place. I love this. East Lansing, San Antonio, one of my favorites. So one of the things I've learned from these webinars about social connection is that you're probably going to end up not listening to a word I have to say and just focus on chatting with each other, which prefer you focused on me, but I understand the need to connect. We are recording this. You'll also be able to listen to it later in case you miss any of it because you're so caught up in conversation with each other. But hoping that the content is compelling enough that I can keep your attention for today's session. So with that, I'm going to kick us off. So I am thrilled to say that after about 4 months of incredible work by the team of researchers and designers, we have really come to this moment of providing a preview on the state of connection in America, focusing on the 6 points of connection. And today I'm going to be walking you through some of the highlights of the research. There's a lot of content here. Again, you can rewatch this once, twice, 100 times. We'll also tomorrow be releasing the report on the website so you can dive in more detail. But thrilled to have you on this journey with us. So many of you helped create this. We had feedback on an early draft from over 50 people who really enabled us to rewrite and go deeper in this report. So this has truly been a community effort. So I want to begin with sort of why this matters. And that is America isn't thriving. And frankly, I think this is true of every country in the world right now. But today we're focused on the United States, but we aren't thriving. Social disconnection now defines the American experience. Like, what does it mean to be an American? It means to be disconnected. It's impacting our health, our democracy, and our quality of life. And you see some of the data from the report that's popped up around people's lack of access to social support, that half of people aren't thriving, that nearly half of us don't even trust other people, that many of us are uninterested in connecting across difference, and that we also found 55% of people feel politically disempowered. This is a fundamental system that is broken, and it's why social connection is, we believe, the greatest challenge of our times. When you look at it specifically around social connection, what we found is that 1 in 2 Americans are vulnerable or at risk. 52%, 1 in 2. And what is interesting is that these 52%, when we look at those statistics from the earlier slide, they are struggling in every single one of those measures. They're struggling with social support, trust. They're struggling with feeling politically engaged. This group of people who lack social connection are seeing this whole range of outcomes affected by that reality. But what's also true is that there's this 48% of people that are on the other side of this equation. They are healthy or thriving. 48%. So that is great news. These are what we call in social science positive deviants. They're doing something different than everyone else, and they're seeing different outcomes. As you look at these points here on the right-hand side, they're seeing that where the 52% are struggling, they're seeing more healthy and positive outcomes in these areas, those that are connected. So what you have to ask, whether you're a civic leader, an entrepreneur, a researcher, is what is the difference between these two populations? Why is one group over here struggling while one is thriving? And it's never clean cut, but I think what the data starts to show is a trend that helps us think about how do we actually repair the world? How do we repair our communities? How do we repair America? So what is it that's different about these 48% of people? What do they do that makes them healthy and thriving? What we found was that they really saw different behaviors around 6 specific behaviors that are everyday behaviors in society. They were more likely to have a neighborhood contact. They were more likely to be part of a community of identity. They were more likely to have regular one-on-one relationships. They were more likely to have a third place that they go to. They were more likely to be part of a community of play, a community of people who shared an activity with them. And they were more likely to engage in community service. They were engaging in the six behaviors that we believe are the behaviors that if we were to have every American adopt, would not only fundamentally change the nature of social connection, but it would reverse what we're seeing around political polarization. It would reverse what we're seeing around economic inequality. It would reverse the negative impact we're seeing on longevity and happiness of people. I don't want to say it would actually create world peace, but as far as I know, this is the thing that could come closest to doing that. We need to have these behaviors adopted by everyone if we want to truly reverse this decline. The great news also is that through the research, we found how and when to enable connection. So this is not just like this amorphous, like people are lonely, people don't trust other people. Oh my God, this is terrible. It's actually, we know how to address this and when to address it now, thanks to this data that's built off of decades of incredible research. We need to design systems that help people access these 6 points of connection. We need to help people know where to get started and to match them with other people to help them get started because people don't want to start on their own. We need to help people when they're in transition, when they're in a growth mindset, when they're open to change. We need to develop both social and civic infrastructure to support making sure everyone has access to these 6 points of connection. This is what is really going to help us truly turn this around. And these are things that as leaders of foundations, cities, companies, nonprofits, community groups, we have the ability to affect. What we've created in summary is a dashboard for rebuilding connection. It's a foundation for learning, action, and collective progress. Because if we don't have that shared foundation, we can't come together to address this issue. And if there's one thing I've realized over the last couple of years is that if we don't come together to address this, we're not going to address this. This requires us all singing from the same songbook, working towards the same goals, if we're really going to fundamentally make an impact. So we now have a way of measuring what percentage of people are struggling with connection. We've also now have measures for these 6 points of connection that we know that when people adopt them changes outcomes in our lives and in our communities. But we also now know when to help people, what barriers to help them overcome. And we also have some key insights into which populations are struggling more to get access to connection. So why does this matter? I believe for the first time now, we have the insight and the urgency, because we know the urgency, we all feel that. But we now have the insight to make the American dream real, to ensure a healthy, thriving society for generations to come. Because the American dream is not about the picket fence alone. It is about the conversation we have over that picket fence. It's about connecting neighbors. It's about realizing that what truly defines America when it's at its best is our interdependence. It's our ability to rely on each other, to bring joy to each other's lives, to help each other in times when we're struggling. This is what defines the American dream, I believe, going forward. And this is something that we can now build together. After today's session, we're going to send you out an email that's going to include a discussion guide. It's a guide for you to take back to your teams to be able to talk about this report and to talk about your own experience with connection and what you can, as a team, as a community, as a group, as a city, start to do to take action on these insights. And you get to have pizza, apparently, according to this wonderful stock photo. Also wanted to have you all save the date, October 15th and 16th, here in Seattle. We're doing our first conference around connected cities, the Connected Cities Summit. We're going to have 2 days where we're going to sit down together to figure out what would a city look like if we truly embrace these 6 points of connection. How would infrastructure need to change? How would investment need to change? How would education need to change? How would our healthcare system need to change? Let's envision what is possible together so that then coming out of that event, we can build it together. So before we drill down into more of the insights, what I really shared with you were the headlines, but I want to take you into the insights. I wanted to share how we actually came about developing this research, because the how is as important as the results, because it is what helps us really understand what is behind the numbers. We have known since about 25 years ago when Bowling Alone came out, Robert Putnam's seminal book, that we've got a problem around connection, and that he brilliantly connected it not just to a well-being, but actually to democracy and our ability to thrive as a pluralistic society. And in 2023, the US Surgeon General declared it a national emergency. This report is building on all that incredible research and so much more that has happened over the last 25 years, and to help us move from awareness to action. And if there's anything I want you to take away from this hour, is that we now can go from awareness to action. We don't need to just sit around and lament the decline of connection. We can do something about it together. We've created a social connection index, a measure of connection that's based on behaviors, not on sentiment. It's not on how people feel, it's on what they're doing. Are they doing the behaviors that we know will not only create connection, but will create sustained connection as a community? And we're going to go into more depth on each of these 6 points of connection, but the core is a measurement of whether or not people have these 6 points of connection in development in their lives. So we built the index based on 3 steps. I'm going to walk you through these. The first one was to identify research-based behaviors central to connection. Those are the 6 points of connection. The second step was to take a lot of the measures that academics, people working in this field for decades have been developing, and measure whether or not those outcomes, those measures correlate to these 6 points of connection. Because if people do the 6 points of connection, it has no impact on those outcomes, they don't really mean anything. They're not actually have an ability to be an index, to be a measure for connection. And the third step was just to make sure that they're universal. Like if these only apply to certain groups of people, then we can't use as an index for the American people. It has to be able to be used broadly as a tool for measuring connection across different demographics. So the 6 points of connection, these 6 everyday behaviors, are based on looking at the research across economics, sociology, psychology, urban planning. We looked across all these different fields and looked at what were they recommending based on data. When they said there was a problem, what were they saying were solutions that they believed would make a difference? And these 6 measures or activities or behaviors are what stood out. These were the ones that were consistently showing up across the research. They were broadly universal. So we didn't include in here, do you have a romantic relationship? Do you have kids? We did not include work in this because those are not universal experiences. We wanted to focus on the universal, everyday experiences of people, regardless of your romantic, family, or work status. We want them to be measurable. This is not about just sentiment analysis. This is about people actually being able to measure if a behavior is happening. And they need to be actionable. When I tell you a ton of people in America are lonely, that's not actionable. When I tell you the vast majority of Americans don't have a single neighbor who they know, that's actionable. We can do something about that. We can measure whether or not it's happening, and we can have confidence in it. So we looked at these 5 outcome measures. We looked at whether people had social support, what their life satisfaction was, do they trust other people, do they have interest in connecting across difference, and do they feel like they have a civic voice? Do they feel like government, society represents their needs? And you can see, across the board that Americans are struggling in all of these measures. American adults are struggling across all of these. But what we then looked at was if you took our 6 points of connection, turn them into an index, so normalize them into a 100-point scale, and then look at these 5 outcomes. Did they correlate? So if people have the 6 points of connection or are on that journey, does that predict that they will have higher life satisfaction, trust, social support, civic voice, ability and willingness to connect across difference? And what you really want to see, as I've sort of increasingly come to understand on these correlations, is that you want to see a score between about 0.3 and 0.6 to show that this is a effective measure, an effective correlation. Because if it's less than that, it means it's not correlating or it's negatively correlating. And if it's over 0.6, it means it's overlapping and it's not measuring something unique. What we saw was that across all of these, they fell within that range. That means the social connection index truly is a strong way for us to be able to move forward, knowing that if we do those things, we are going to see these outcomes in society. We then also looked at bands because we wanted to look at what are these different definitions of bands within the social connection index. And we created 4 bands: high risk, 0 to 24, vulnerable, 25 to 49, healthy, thriving. And we then also looked across all the outcomes. And what we found was that there were actually pretty clear delineation between these different bands where you saw step change in the different outcomes. So it enabled us to feel pretty confident that we had defined different bands that actually were giving us insights into whether or not someone was thriving when they were in that band. We also then defined like our index number. So we talk about 52 is a social connection index number. That's based on the number of people who fall within the high risk and vulnerable population. And then finally, in building this out, we wanted to make sure that this generally operated at the same behavior across different demographic groups, that we would see the same general shape of behavior. Not that the outcomes are identical, but that they would follow the same shape to show that this is universal. So we looked at it by age, region, race and ethnicity, and by binary gender. And across all those, we saw that the behaviors were consistent in terms of their overall pattern. So frankly, like we had hoped for that outcome, but we knew it was a long shot that this would actually fit together so nicely. And I was thrilled to see that these 6 points of connection truly are a powerful way of determining outcomes, but that it's also true across different demographic groups. So let's go into the findings. As you now know, 52% of adults are falling into this at-risk or vulnerable population, with 20% at that sort of high-risk rate. And then we see at the thriving level, only 17% of people are thriving. When you start to build that into bands, as I was sharing earlier, we look at that 20% at-risk number. When you looked also at the outcome measures associated with it, these people had very limited durable relationships, low trust, little civic voice, minimal access to shared or bridged spaces in life, and sort of low willingness to connect across difference. But you saw with each of these bands, you saw a consistent rise in each of those different variables, so that by the time someone's in that thriving category, this experience of being an American, of thriving, people have strong, diverse connections, broad civic ties, marked by trust and a sense of voice and a sense of resilience. So again, we can start to really talk about these as different life experiences that people are having and how we can help people go from an at-risk life experience to a vulnerable one, to a healthy one, to a thriving one. It helps us to start to really build a model for talking about and measuring connection. We then looked at, with these scores, how much did race, income, gender, income affect people's likelihood of being healthy versus non-healthy. And what we saw was that there was definitely a difference. I mean, there's a marked difference in gender. We saw women were less likely to have connection as measured here. We found, or like, yeah, less likely. We found that, people of color had lower scores. We saw that income, though, was the number one determinant. We saw that there was almost a 100% difference between those making over 100,000 and under 100,000. You went from 35 to 60. But age, we actually found there was no difference statistically in scores between people of different ages. I think this is really important for us to understand because as we think about building infrastructure to address this, we need to recognize that different people are having different access to infrastructure and support. And we really wanted to drill down on income because this was the area where there was such a marked difference in experience, where we see that, the lowest income threshold under 50K, 67% of people are at risk or vulnerable. Whereas you look at the 150K and above level, 69% are healthy or thriving. Economics are clearly at play here. The ability to have access to the resources, to the third places, to have the time to be able to invest in connection is a wildly different experience for people based on their household income. And sadly, I think this is just another example of inequality in our society that we need to address. And given what we know about the implications for it, and also just seeing what has happened on our political system as a result of this, we have to be taking this into account. So let's go into the 6 points of connection. Let's drill down from that high level measure down into each of these 6 points and start to understand some of how that's showing up for people. Overall, we found that roughly half of people had one or more of the 6 points strongly established in their lives. 0 or 1 had 50% of their points of connection. We found on the flip side, only 5% had all 6. And you see that there's a sort of gradation of people at different levels that have different numbers of these 6 points. So what matters here is not that someone has all 6. It's about the fact that we want to help people establish 1, 2, 3, 4, as many as possible. And some of them may not get fully to the threshold where they count as being a strong behavior, but even just making progress towards them, we're finding makes a difference when we look at the scores. As we look across the 6 points of connection, you can see sort of none of them are over 50% adoption, and that most of them are a third or less of the population. 42% being the high water mark with someone having a neighborhood contact, the low water mark being a tie between having a third place and community service. The one thing we did find, though, which was really interesting, was that community of play, which is being part of a community of shared activity, actually correlated with you being more likely to have the other points of connection adopted and also better outcomes. So we're increasingly believing that focusing on helping people join communities around shared activity may be sort of the foundational piece within the 6 points that we should focus on. So I'm going to go through each of the 6 points. So only 42% of people have a neighbor they can count on in an emergency. And if you look at that from a demographic standpoint, what was interesting was that people who are 60 and over were much more likely to have a neighborhood contact, which makes a lot of sense when you think about it for multiple reasons. But young adults and people of color are the least likely. So as we start to think about like how do we help address this issue, I think within this one, really looking at the younger population, people of color as key sort of audiences that we need to be able to serve. When it comes to community of identity, we're finding that few join communities of shared identities, 35% of people. It is very uneven in terms of people's ability to access a community of identity. And this one was heavily determined by income. You see that sort of wide swing from income there on the third line. Age didn't look like it had really any meaningful impact. And you did see some variation in terms of race and gender. One-on-one relationships are not routine. We found 28% of people get together with friends and relatives at least twice per week, which is what has been established as sort of the measure of having strong social connection. We're seeing only 28% of people have that. And there it's interesting, like much closer, I think, in terms of behaviors here. But again, we're seeing that, income is something that matters, and that younger adults are actually more likely to have it than older. So interesting again to see how these demographics play out. And I think there's a lot more work we all need to do on thinking about with each of these points, how are we actually seeing these differences emerge? And we're going to be working on every month a new playbook on each of these 6 points. We're going to deep dive into really thinking about and doing research about why are we seeing these differences. Our fourth point of connection, a third place, we found that 26% of people visit a third place regularly. So it is by far not the norm. It's good to see that there's population here that say yes, but I don't go very often, or I go occasionally. But to really have this as a healthy measure, we're only seeing 26%. And this again, gender, we're seeing no real meaningful variation, but race, income, and age, we're seeing pretty broad difference in people. Community of play, this is that one that I talked about is so important, where we have being part of a community of people who do activities together. Only 30% of people fit in this category. And this one is particularly concerning just because it does so strongly correlate with the other points as well as outcomes. And here we're seeing income is really the driver. I mean, it's nice to see the variation in the others is maybe not as pronounced, but the variation in income is very pronounced. And then community service. 26% of people regularly volunteer. And you can see in the question we ask, I regularly engage in community service or activities that help others in my community. We're seeing only 26% of people agreed with that statement. And here again, I think we see income like really pops out as being the one where we see the biggest difference and the greatest challenge, where only 18% of low income and people of color are experiencing are regularly engaging in community service. So that's sort of the state of the 6 points. There's clearly a lot of work we can do there to make these stronger. There's a lot we need to understand about how it's affecting different populations. But I think we can all sort of see in this is a couple of things. One, it's a problem. It is a problem for everyone, but it's especially a problem for certain groups of people. And we can do better if we can help people. But to do that, we need to understand what are the opportunities for reconnecting. When we ask people, what are your barriers to connecting? 87% of people reported at least one barrier to connection. So more than 4 out of 5 people said that they had at least one barrier to connection. Only 13% said they had no barriers. And I want to meet more of those people. So then we broke down like what are the barriers that people reported. So it ranged from I'm too tired or busy, which was the one most often reported. I'm uncomfortable going to social events by myself. I'm scared or nervous to put myself out there socially. I don't know where to start. Things or people I'd connect with are too far away. It costs too much. I find it hard to share my true self with others. It's hard to keep going after I start. I don't know how to join the right communities, and I don't have the skills. But what was interesting is we then cut the data to look at, okay, so of those people who are reporting those barriers, were their scores actually lower? Do we actually see that people who had that barrier reported that they had a lower social connection level? And what we found is only four of them actually correlated with more negative outcomes. It was the people in dark blue. I'm too tired or busy. I'm uncomfortable going to social events by myself. I don't know where to start, and I don't have the skills. So it's really interesting. These are the ones where we're seeing like there's actual correlation to lower scores. And what's also interesting as you think about those is that some of them are like relatively straightforward for us to address. And while others are more challenging. Like I'm too tired or busy, I think is a much broader structural problem with work and social media, et cetera. But I don't know where to start. We can help with that. So we looked at, of these barriers, which ones are actually creating a negative or correlated with a negative score, but then also what percentage of people are reporting it? Because, for example, I don't have the skills was showing a pretty high negative score correlation, but it was a relatively small percentage of the population that had that barrier. Similarly, I'm too tired or busy. A lot of people were reporting that problem, but it wasn't having as much impact on their score. The two that really stood out as being a large number of people, and it was really keeping their scores down, were I'm uncomfortable going to social events by myself, and I don't know where to start. These are two things we as human beings can help others with. These are things that we can build into our institutions. These are not hard problems to solve in the grand scheme of things. That these are the two barriers that are really the largest number of people having a negative outcome is something that I really fundamentally believe should give us hope that we can do something about this. This is not too big a challenge to overcome. This is something that we can all think about ways we could impact. The next thing we looked at was when should we be helping people? And what the research historically has shown is that when people are in life transitions, they're more likely in a growth mindset. They're more likely open to change. They're not just sort of going through their life plodding along. They're actually looking around them, trying to figure out who they are and how they want to show up in the world. And what's interesting is that in the last year, half of Americans went through one or more major life changes. So a lot of people are in this transition space when we're best able to support them. And we looked at a wide range of life transitions. So everything from the most commonly cited one, experienced a significant change in your health or ability, to I got a new job, moved to a new city or town, became a parent, got married, got divorced, started school, retired, empty nest. Like we looked at all these different life changes, and there's many more we could measure, but this were the most common cited ones in research. And again, what we found was that the people in dark blue were actually seeing through these life transitions, their connection scores go up. Their connection scores were going up. Whereas the ones in light blue we were seeing were sort of staying at the same low levels. So what we really saw is we looked at what are the people who get a new job, become a new parent, get married, or start school have in common? They have institutional support during their transition to help them with connection. When you get a new job, there's systems there to help you with that. When you become a new parent, there's systems there to help you with that. Could there be more? Absolutely. But there are systems there, and we socially know to help new parents. When you get married, similarly. When you start school, similarly. But when you get divorced, there's no real support system for that. When you're an empty nester, there's no real support system for that. When you have a change in your health, unfortunately, there's way too few systems out there to help you. So when we think about this in terms of strategic focus, on the left, we see the areas where people are actually seeing an increase in connection. And this is not to say we shouldn't do more in here. Actually, I'm a big believer in take what's working and double down, do more there because it's working. But on the right, we see the areas where there's not institutional and social support for people. And if we look again at which of them are affecting the largest percentage of people, it's people who experienced a significant change in your health or ability. This is where social prescribing, integrating into our healthcare system is such an imperative. And the second is move to a new city or town. When you actually are a newcomer, a new resident, this is an area where unless they're connected to a job or something else, there's no systemic support for these people. And we're seeing that it's actually having a negative impact on their ability to connect. This again is great news because it means that if we do the things on the left for the people on the right, we should see very different outcomes. And if we are actually able to identify what institutions are people on the right interacting with, we can start to build the systems into those organizations, those institutions that'll help actually serve these people in need. So the last area we looked into that I want to go through today is really about connecting across difference. We all experience this every day, this issue with people not being connected across difference. What we found is that 60% of people reported being open to connecting even across difference. 60%, 6 out of 10 people. And then we looked at like, okay, well, that's great. You're interested in connecting across difference, but with whom are you open to connecting across difference? And what we saw is that people were most open to connecting across race and ethnicity. That was an area where there was a higher level of openness to it. Income, pretty high, a little lower. Starting to get down to religious belief, you start to see it going down. And then you saw a big drop when it came to sexuality and political ideology. And that there's a 57% relative difference between our willingness to connect across race and ethnicity and political ideology, which is really interesting because I think it actually points to a deeply troubling challenge, but I think it also points to an opportunity, which is if we can use people's openness to connect across certain areas, but in a way in which it actually is connecting them also across political difference, we can find a more comfortable way into it versus trying to just directly connect people based on the areas where there's discomfort. Let's connect them where there's comfort, but through that process, enable them to meet people who are coming at life from a different political ideology. When we asked people, how many of your close friends are from a different political party than yours, we found 14% said a lot, 40% said some, 30% just a few, and 16% said none, nada, zero. So 46% have few to no friends of a different political party. And then we looked at, of those people, how many of them said they were open to meeting people across difference? And only 64% of those didn't want to meet them either. So they're saying, I don't got them and I don't want them. So I think a really interesting population there that deserves further study, where there's not a growth mindset and openness to it, and that there's not that existing behavior. Raj Chetty's work around economic mobility was a real influence on our thinking, and really thinking about his work around how if people are able to connect across different economic household levels, different socioeconomic class, that is one of the greatest predictors of whether or not they're actually able to move in their economic situation. And what we found, which was really great, was that 68% of people are open to connecting across income, across household income, socioeconomic levels. So we're seeing a high interest in that, not necessarily seeing, though, the mechanisms in society to enable that. And what was cool to see was that this really was across the board. It wasn't just like low income was interested in meeting across or high income was. Pretty much consistently, everyone has a similar level of interest in connecting across income. And I think this is one of the most powerful ways we can actually enable people to connect across other differences as well. But we know that this intervention, if we build infrastructure to enable this, it's also going to help decrease inequality in society. So what we're seeing is that there's pathways to reconnect America that are emerging. Most people want connection. They lack pathways to build it. Connection is breaking down in predictable moments, especially during life transitions. Barriers are common, but only a few drive meaningful impact. And where support is intentionally designed, connection appears to be happening. So we're seeing where this works. We're seeing what to do more of. So what comes next? What can we do to help move this forward together? I want to talk about this for a few minutes. Connection, I believe, and our team believes, is the shared civic cause. We found that at least a third of every group we studied has vulnerable or at-risk social connection. When I go across the country and talk to people of all different backgrounds, everyone sees the same challenge. Connection is, I believe, the unifying frame that leaders, whether it's a corporate leader, foundation, a mayor, a governor, this is a topic in which you can rally everyone to find shared paths forward. This is the topic that everyone's seeing in their household. They're seeing it in their community. They're seeing it in their workplace. They're seeing it in the headlines in the newspaper. Everyone is seeing this, and it's fundamentally human at the same level of like eating food and oxygen are. We all recognize this, and if we're able to develop the right language, this is something that can truly unite us. This can be the one thing that brings us back together. And it's kind of ironic. It's like connection is the thing that actually can connect us if we all approach it together. So, our recommendations for how you can, as a mayor, as a CEO, as a foundation leader, as a community leader, can help activate people and institutions. Number one, adopt the 6 points of connection. Adopt it as a framework for evaluating and thinking about your strategy, but also for measurement, so we can all do that together. Help people get started. You don't have to take them to the finish line. Help them get started. I love the work of the Heath brothers around this, around creating change is about showing something that's possible, helping people see a life that they could have, and then just showing them the first couple steps and helping them in the first couple steps along that. You don't have to figure out how to get them to the promised land. You have to help them see that there is a promised land that they want and help them get started with those first couple steps and not alone. So we need to design those simple on-ramps for people in our communities and truly support people to do this together, not as a solitary act. But to make this something that is durable and scalable, we need to do some things more broadly as a field. We need a shared framework. We need to adopt the 6 points and the social connection index as a common framework for design and measurement in our field to truly move us forward. We need cross-sector ownership. This is not a nonprofit thing. It's not an academic thing. It's not a health thing. It's not a government thing. This needs to be something where we bring leaders across every industry, every field together around a shared table that says we own connection for our city, we own connection for our state, we own connection for our country, and we're going to work across all these organizations that touch on people's life experience and that create the behaviors that impact connection. We need to all come together to have the power and to be able to sing from the same songbook to actually affect change. This is so critical, and so little of this is happening where we're truly bringing leaders across sectors together to say, we got this. We're taking ownership of this challenge. We need to build capacity to scale. We need to mobilize funding. There's not nearly enough funding for connection. And we need to mobilize volunteers. We were looking at, back in the 1950s, when often there was a single income earner in a household, the other member of that household was typically doing 10 to 15 hours of service in their community. And a lot of it was around connection. And we looked at how much of that has gone away. And we looked at how the population has changed, like we've doubled in size. And the back of the envelope was we need $500 billion in additional volunteering in our country to actually rebuild that connection. So we need to do a mass mobilization of volunteers in our nation to serve as welcome committees, to serve on the front lines of helping connect neighbors, to build social clubs, to help create third places, to build out broader volunteering. We need to re-engage the welcome committees in our neighborhoods to do this critical work, because this is not going to happen with a few $1 billion in this or that. Like, we need $500 billion in labor to actually turn this around. That is something that we can do as companies. That's something we can do as individuals. That's what we can do as mayors. We can rally and build that infrastructure to enable all those people to be successful. And then we really need to expand third places. We need to expand the number of social clubs. We need to expand service, which has been atrophying in our society. These are critical for this to be ongoing. Third places, especially during COVID, really took a hit. And today we're starting to see those rebuilt. But we're seeing a lot of them are rebuilt without understanding the behavioral science around what actually makes a coffee shop a true third place, what makes a gym a true third place. We need to really understand that so that we can build these so that they're effective. So how can you work with us, the U.S. Chamber of Connection? This year, we're looking for 5 cities that want to be founding partners, that want to open a local Chamber of Connection to bring leaders across sectors together to say, we got this. We're going to take ownership of this. We're going to start welcoming newcomers and people during these key life transitions. We're going to activate volunteers at a scale we haven't seen since the 1950s. We are going to fundamentally change the way our city talks about connection to adopt the 6 points and to move this work forward. And we're going to be part of a community of other cities that are all doing this together. And we're all learning and failing and winning together. If you're a city that's interested in becoming one of these founding members, on our website, there's an application to get the process started to become one of these 5 founding cities. And we're talking with amazing cities across the country that want to make this happen. And I'm hoping many of you are on this webinar. I'm hoping many of you who we haven't talked to yet are here. I'm hoping that many of you who know someone who might be interested would be in starting a chapter, would be on this, be part of this movement. The second one is corporate services. We are looking to engage 10,000 volunteers to serve as this new welcome committee over the next couple of years. And we need companies that want to pledge 50, 100, 1,000 employees who want to serve as these welcome committees and be part of this overall community of volunteers who once a month are doing one small act to bring connection back to their community. We're going to be supporting them all along the way to make this a rich experience to improve connection in their own lives. We're going to be helping them build the skills of connection around the 6 points. And we're going to help build a learning community so they're all helping each other move this forward. This is a chance to introduce a type of volunteering that your employees are incredibly hungry for and that is going to enable them to not only transform their communities, but their own lives and to bring skills back into your company that are dramatically more important now than ever. We need your help to talk about connection. Use the discussion guide I mentioned earlier to get a group of people together for lunch next week in your office, in your community, and to read the report together and use our conversation prompts to start to talk about your own journey, but also what are we doing well now as a community? Where do we need to invest more? And to start to develop a plan for how you're going to move forward. Because connection happens through conversation. And finally, we believe this research is critical to being able to activate everyone to take action. And we're looking for opportunities to come and keynote your conference, to be part of your podcast, your webinar. We're looking for opportunities to be in your newsletter. We're looking for opportunities for you to bring this data into your presentations. We want to make sure that this data, these insights are everywhere, that there isn't a mayor, a CEO, a foundation leader, a nonprofit leader, a community leader who doesn't know about the 6 points of connection, the barriers that are keeping people back, the life transitions, and how we can actually do something about this now. So I'm hoping I will see a lot of you in October at the National Nordic Museum here in Seattle. We're going to be bringing together about 150 leaders. We're looking for people who are thinking about this systemically, thinking about what is the infrastructure of a city that truly is thriving, that is truly connected, and to start to build a picture that we can share with the world of where we want to build towards. Not how do we create the next Silicon Valley, but how do we actually create the next city that's built on a foundation of human trust, belonging, and connection. This is going to be an incredible 2 days, and really hoping that I will see many of you there. We're also, as I shared earlier, every month for the rest of this year, planning to publish a playbook that's going to be a deep dive on either one of the life transitions or one of the 6 points, where we're going to cut all this data, this survey of 2,000 people, based on that single point, going deep on our first one, welcoming newcomers. What do we know about welcoming newcomers? So we're going to look at the data around that specifically, the demographics, the 6 points, et cetera, around welcoming newcomers. We're going to help share learnings from our Seattle pilot, where we created the first onboarding for newcomers in a major city in America. We're going to do an in-depth literature review of existing research on life transitions around moving. And we're going to look for case studies of people who are doing a great job of this in their communities today. And if any of you have any of those, we'd love to hear from you so we can include them. We're going to have a preview webinar on February 10th at 9 a.m. The following day, we'll be releasing the playbook and be having sort of a month campaign around that specific topic, in this case, welcoming newcomers. And then each month there'll be a different playbook and webinar so we can collectively go on this journey together to reconnect the country, that we can together discover what's working, discover what's not working, and experiment on this. And our hope is that every year we'll update these with new learnings as we progress and learn from our successes and our failures. And as I shared, I'm really hoping that you'll, in the next couple of weeks, schedule a lunch for 8 to 10 people in your organization, in your community, and just sit down. And we've got 4 prompts for you to go over to really talk about the findings in this report, to start to think about what does this mean for me? What does this mean for my community going forward? We also plan to do a follow-up study next year, and we want your input on what additional questions could we explore that would help bring new insights that would make this more actionable for your community. Let us know what areas you'd want us to go deeper on. Maybe it's around technology and its role in this. Maybe it's deeper on certain demographics. Maybe it's more around specific regions. We didn't really look at urban versus more rural populations. Like, what are the things that would be most actionable for you? Not what's interesting, because we've got plenty of things that are interesting out there. We want to know what would be actionable, that if you knew this, it would enable more investment, more activity, more volunteering. What is it that you want to know that we can include in that research? And finally, I just wanted to leave you with my contact information. I really want you to consider me part of your team. and to just share what our broader mandate is as the U.S. Chamber of Connection. We're really here to make connection a cause. We want to ensure the 6 points of connection is universally understood and adopted in our culture. We want to create the backbone measures for building actionable data and insights for cities, for communities. We want to build ecosystems. We're working with museums. We want to work with libraries. We want to work with park systems. We want to work with companies to figure out how can they be part of reinforcing these 6 points of connections for enabling them to actually reach people at the key moments in their life transitions where they already have a relationship. Let's use that relationship to help people with these barriers and overcoming them. And our goal is that in every city and town in America within a decade, there will be a Chamber of Connection, a locally owned nonprofit organization that is making connection a priority, that is putting connection up there with education and health and the environment as what is necessary to thrive going forward. So, with that, I want to thank all of you for being part of this journey. I want to thank you for investing in connection. I know there's a lot of questions, and I'm not going to look at them today because there's just too many people on today's webinar, but we are collecting all of your questions and we are going to pull those together and respond to them. But I would just love to take 1 minute for people in the chat just to share with us, what is the one thing that you're taking away from this conversation? What is one insight that you're taking away from this that feels actionable for you, that feels like it actually could help make a difference? So let's just take a minute and just share through chat, what is it that is standing out to you? And I'm going to watch as these come in because I'm very interested. Number one takeaway, David, I love it. Get started. I love that. That's my favorite. Get shit done. Get started. I love it. What else for people? What's standing out for folks coming out of this? People are hungry for it. Let's take action. Get going. Do something. Connection is the cause. I love it. Find a friend and get started with them. That's genius. Simple acts. Say hi to neighbors across the street. It can be that simple. I love it. Community will save us. There's so much reason for optimism right now. I know reading the paper, there's so much we're struggling with, but I really have seen when people come together, they overcome so much of the BS that we're dealing with in society today. I really feel like we can make this happen. More tools to facilitate connection. Amazing. Third places. Third places are one of my most exciting topics, and it's an area where we can do so much more, and we can support people in building them. Digging into the trends, it's great, Eric. Appreciate that. And in Canada too, our best friends. As Eric knows, I spent a lot of my childhood in Canada. Not a citizen, but feel like an honorary one on good days. Community of play is foundational. Yeah, that is a really key piece that is not surprising when you consider like how much more open we are to connection when we're with people where we share an activity. We talk a lot about deep conversation, but deep play is actually as important and perhaps more important. And it also connects us across differences because we share a love for an activity, even though we may have very different backgrounds. Breaking bread, break a sweat, break the ice. That sounds like a t-shirt in the making. Think locally to connect globally. Oh my God, there's like so many great taglines here. This is like a marketing focus group. I love it. More pen pals. Love that as well. So one last question I would love for folks to share is, what is one question you'd like us to address in future studies? What is one question you would love to see us ask in addition to the 25 or instead of some of the 25 that we asked this year? Is there something where you'd like to see something broader? What is one thing you'd like to see us dive into more so that it can bring more action? A lot of work with people 50 to 67 falling out of the workplace and struggling to get back in. Super interesting population. I think there's a lot of challenges in that age group. How do we design the place and environment that is less effort is needed? Public schools can be, I think public schools can play one of the biggest roles in this. We need to really help kids understand what it looks like to have a connected life and to help them develop a vision for their future life in which it's not about what do you do, but it's who are you with, and helping them really think that way and to help them also teach their parents how to do it, frankly. I think there's so much opportunity in schools to make a difference. And while we're not focused on that yet, I'm hopeful that one day soon we can start to do that. So what else we got here? These are great. One of the areas I really want to dive into is the people that are in that thriving 17%. I really want to go deeper dive on what those positive deviants are doing, that even more so than the healthy folks. Who sits in that group? Haley out of Pittsburgh here. Um, People across lifespan, so intergenerational. Um, awesome. So before I close this out here, and thank you for all these. We're going to save all this and work with all of what you're sharing. I want to thank you again. The official report is launched tomorrow. Really hope that I can have all of your help to get the word out there, to share the report with your community, to share the findings, to integrate the findings into your presentations, into your writing, to really reflect on what we're doing. Because a report without distribution and audience is worthless. And you really, as our close community, are the ones that can actually get this out into the world. So I want to thank you in advance for just helping to get this out there. It really is the difference maker. And with that, just thank you again, and thank you to Ian. Thank you for Anto. Thank you for Vickery, who are really my key partners in building this report. And to the 50 people who provided feedback that help us make this better, thank you for doing this. It's our first report version was good. I feel like so proud of what we've created here, thanks to all of that input. So with that, thank you all, and go out there and start connecting. Let's get started.